There are moments in politics that feel loud, explosive, chaotic in ways you can see and hear and measure in polling data and stock tickers and cable news chyrons. And then there are moments that feel quieter on the surface but shake the foundation underneath everything. What just happened between Elon Musk and Donald Trump is the second kind of moment. It didn't come with a press conference. It didn't come with a resignation letter. It came in the form of a few posts on a platform that Musk owns, directed at a policy the president refuses to back down from. And yet those posts may mark the first visible crack in the most powerful alliance in American politics right now. Elon Musk and Donald Trump just had their first real public falling out. Not over China, not over Russia, not over Ukraine or NATO or the Middle East. Over Canada. That detail matters more than most people realize. Because Canada is not a rival superpower. It is not a hostile regime. It is not an adversary state building aircraft carriers in disputed waters. It is the United States' closest trading partner, its longest peaceful border, its most integrated economic ally. If a fracture between Trump and Musk is going to happen over Canada, it tells you this isn't about geopolitics at the margins. It's about the core of how America defines power. You have to understand how rare this is. In modern American political history, there is an extremely short list of moments when the individual closest to the operational machinery of a president's agenda publicly contradicts that president's central policy, not privately, not through leaks, not through anonymous sources familiar with the matter, publicly. Power at this level does not tolerate visible dissent. It disciplines it. It contains it. It makes it disappear. And yet here we are. Musk didn't hedge. He didn't speak in diplomatic half-phrases. He called the tariffs on Canada a mistake. That word mistake carries enormous weight in Washington because it implies not just disagreement, but miscalculation. It implies that the policy is not merely controversial, but wrong in its consequences. And when that word is used by the wealthiest person on earth, a man who poured hundreds of millions into Trump's return to power and now sits at the helm of the Department of Government Efficiency, it stops being commentary. It becomes a signal. To understand why this matters, you have to rewind. For more than 3 decades, the economic relationship between the United States and Canada has operated on an assumption so basic it rarely needed to be stated out loud. These two economies are not competitors. They are fused, interwoven. A car assembled in Michigan may contain steel from Ontario, electronics routed through Quebec, components that cross the border half a dozen times before the final product rolls off the line, agricultural exports, energy flows, industrial inputs. The border functions less like a barrier and more like a seam stitching together one of the most integrated economic zones in the world. That framework was formalized under NAFTA in 1994. It was revised and renamed under the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement in 2020, a deal negotiated and celebrated by Donald Trump himself. At the time, he called it the greatest trade agreement in American history. It was proof, he argued, that his brand of hard-nosed negotiation could secure better terms for American workers without dismantling the architecture entirely. Fast forward to 2025. In the opening stretch of his second term, Trump began imposing sweeping tariffs on Canadian goods 25% across a broad spectrum of products, additional levies on Canadian energy exports. On paper, tariffs are a tool. In practice, at that scale and against that partner, they are an act of economic confrontation. Canada responded with retaliatory measures targeting tens of billions in American exports. The language from Ottawa shifted from cautious diplomacy to controlled defiance. And into that escalating standoff stepped Elon Musk. Now consider who Musk is in this equation. He is not a marginal supporter. He is not a casual donor. He is the richest individual alive, with a net worth that dwarfs the GDP of entire nations. He leads companies that define modern technological ambition. Tesla, SpaceX, Neuralink X. He reshaped electric vehicles, privatized spaceflight, and inserted himself into the global conversation on artificial intelligence and digital speech. In 2024, he aligned himself decisively with Trump financially, rhetorically, strategically. He helped fund the campaign. He amplified the message. He accepted a formal role in the administration under the banner of efficiency and reform. His presence served as cultural validation for Trump's governing coalition, proof that Silicon Valley innovation and populist nationalism could coexist. But tariffs on Canada exposed the fault line between those worldviews. Trump's trade philosophy is instinctual and deeply rooted. For decades, he has argued that America is exploited by its trading partners, that deficits equal weakness, that tariffs are leverage, that economic pressure restores respect. It is not a tactical position for him. It is an identity. When he sees imbalances in certain sectors, he sees betrayal. His response is pressure. Musk, by contrast, operates in global supply chains. Tesla sources components internationally. SpaceX relies on materials and partnerships that cross borders. His businesses depend on regulatory predictability and open commercial pathways. A 25% tariff is not abstract to him. It is cost, it is friction. It is inefficiency introduced into systems he has spent years optimizing. When Musk publicly called the Canada tariffs counterproductive, he wasn't merely offering an opinion. He was acknowledging a conflict between the president's political instinct and the operational reality of the industries shaping the next century. The White House's initial silence spoke volumes. In Washington, silence is rarely accidental. It suggests internal debate. It suggests uncertainty over how to respond without escalating the fracture. Because if the administration openly rebukes Musk, it risks alienating one of its most influential allies. If it concedes, it undercuts the president's posture of strength. This is not just a disagreement over trade percentages. It is a clash between two visions of American power. Trump's vision is nationalist and bilateral. America first. Deals struck through leverage. Strength demonstrated through pressure. It views interdependence as vulnerability. Musk's vision is expansionist in a different way. It assumes interconnected markets, cross-border innovation, and stable alliances as prerequisites for technological dominance. You cannot build global electric vehicle networks or satellite constellations in a climate of constant tariff escalation. These visions can coexist when stakes are low. They strain when stakes are existential. Follow the incentives, and the divergence becomes obvious. Trump, in his second term, faces no re-election. His constraints are fewer. His appetite for disruption may be greater. Musk, meanwhile, must consider shareholders, supply chains, and long-term strategic positioning. For him, destabilizing North American integration is not symbolic. It affects production timelines, cost structures, and investor confidence. There is also the geopolitical layer. Canada is not simply another trade partner. It is embedded in defense cooperation, intelligence sharing, and energy security frameworks. Public fractures within the American leadership structure send signals outward to Ottawa, to Brussels, to Beijing. From Canada's perspective, Musk's dissent introduces leverage. It demonstrates that the American position is not monolithic, that there are powerful voices inside the US, power structure, who see the tariffs as damaging. In negotiations, perception matters. Internal division alters bargaining dynamics. American businesses are watching too. Many have been reluctant to challenge the tariffs publicly. Political risk is real. But Musk's willingness to speak may lower that barrier. It gives corporate leaders cover to voice concerns previously confined to boardrooms. And then there's the institutional question. The Trump-Musk alliance was always, at some level, transactional. Trump benefited from Musk's money and megaphone. Musk benefited from proximity to regulatory influence and federal contracts. As long as those interests aligned, unity held. But tariffs on Canada hit a nerve where transactional alignment fractures. The deeper issue this exposes is structural. The administration contains competing philosophies. Populist economic nationalism on one side, market-driven technological globalism on the other. Those tensions were manageable in rhetoric. They are harder to manage in policy execution. So what happens next? In the immediate term, open rupture is unlikely. Neither side benefits from a dramatic split. More plausible is managed tension, public disagreement, private recalibration. Advisors may use Musk's comments to argue internally for moderation. The president may frame any adjustment not as retreat, but as strategic deal-making. Over the next 60 days, outcomes diverge. Either the tariffs are softened under the banner of a new agreement, or retaliatory escalation intensifies, with economic pain registering in politically sensitive states. Agricultural exports, automotive manufacturing, energy flows, These sectors do not exist in abstraction. They are rooted in communities whose reactions shape political consequences. Longer term, this moment could define the trajectory of Trump's second term. If the administration leans fully into economic confrontation, it risks alienating segments of its own coalition that depend on global integration. If it recalibrates, it acknowledges limits to instinct-driven disruption. The most significant takeaway is not that Musk criticized a policy. It is that he did so publicly, clearly, and without retreat. That signals confidence in his independence and perhaps concern about direction. History often announces itself quietly before it becomes obvious. The first crack in a coalition rarely looks dramatic. It looks like a disagreement over something technical, a tariff percentage, a trade partner. But behind that technical disagreement lies a philosophical divide about how a superpower operates in a networked world. The coming days will reveal whether this was a contained dispute or the opening chapter of a broader unraveling. Watch for elaboration or retraction. Watch for subtle shifts in tone from the trade office. Watch Canadian statements for coded references to American division. Watch markets in sectors tied tightly to cross-border commerce. Because when alliances between powerful figures fracture, even slightly, the effects ripple outward. And here is the question that lingers, the one that should keep you thinking beyond headlines and partisan takes. If Elon Musk is willing to publicly challenge the president on a cornerstone economic policy this early in the term, what other policies are under quiet internal strain? And how long before those strains surface? This is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of a recalibration whose consequences will stretch far beyond Canada. Power structures rarely break cleanly. They shift, they adjust, they realign. But once the first visible crack appears, everyone inside and outside the structure knows it is there, and that changes everything. The question now is what happens next, not in theory, but in real time. The fissure that opened between Musk and Trump didn't appear in a boardroom. It didn't appear in a memo. It appeared on a public platform for the entire world to see. And that changes the dynamic inside the White House in ways that are subtle but profound. Advisors who might have whispered cautions about Canada tariffs now have permission to speak louder, to press for pragmatic adjustments without fear of immediate reprisal. The public break allows room for maneuver private recalibration under the guise of political continuity, but it also raises expectations. Because when the most powerful private citizen in the country openly questions the president, the world notices. Allies notice. Adversaries notice. Markets notice. And every actor in this space begins adjusting to a new reality, whether consciously or unconsciously. Look at Canada. Prime Minister Carney didn't ask for this disruption. He didn't provoke it. But now, Musk's statements serve as leverage. They signal internal division. They suggest the US position is not as monolithic as it has been presented. That matters when you're negotiating billions in goods, energy, and industrial components. It changes the calculus of retaliation, the willingness to hold firm, the strategy of finding alternative partners in Europe or Asia. It is subtle, but the subtlety is powerful. The ripple effect moves quietly, but deliberately, across trade boards, parliamentary briefings, and corporate strategy sessions. American businesses are watching this play out too. Manufacturers, agricultural exporters, technology firms, those who depend on stable North American supply chains have been navigating uncertainty with frustration and caution. Many cannot speak publicly. Many have waited for signals from inside the administration before voicing opposition. Musk's public dissent provides that signal. It gives permission to question, to plan differently, to advocate subtly within trade associations or directly with legislators. It is not revolutionary. It is strategic. But strategy at this scale changes outcomes. And then there is the structural lesson here. The Trump-Musk alliance was transactional, not ideological. Trump needed Musk's financial backing, his cultural legitimacy, and the narrative of Silicon Valley endorsement. Musk needed access, influence, and regulatory predictability. As long as their goals aligned, the alliance functioned like a machine. But policy friction reveals that alignment is conditional. Interests can diverge, and when they do, public fissures become inevitable. What you saw on Musk's platform is the first visible evidence that divergence has arrived. Inside the White House, the consequences are immediate but invisible. Conversations that used to be managed in whispers now carry weight. Internal debates that were theoretical now acquire real urgency. Policy teams must reconcile the president's instincts with operational realities in ways that leave no room for error. Every statement, every memo, every interaction is now refracted through the lens of public fracture. Over the next weeks, several paths emerge. In the short term, managed tension is likely. Neither side benefits from a total rupture. Musk will not resign, Trump will not fire him. The disagreement will exist, publicly acknowledged but privately navigated. Over the medium term, the administration may begin to recalibrate Canada tariffs subtly. A deal could emerge, framed as a strategic adjustment rather than retreat, as Trump prefers. Alternatively, the tariffs could hold, retaliatory measures escalate, and the political consequences manifest in border states where livelihoods depend on cross-border integration. The agricultural sector, manufacturing hubs, and technology corridors feel this friction immediately and personally. The economic consequences are tangible. Political calculations must adjust. Longer term, the significance transcends a single trade dispute. Musk's public break embodies a philosophical clash over America's direction. Trump's vision is bilateral, transactional, and nationalist. Power asserted through pressure, leverage extracted from every ally, every neighbor, every partner. Musk's vision is integrated, global, and long-term. Power built through open markets, technological leadership, and predictable alliances. These visions can coexist when stakes are low, but not when stakes are existential, not when the health of a multi-trillion-dollar economy and the future of North American supply chains are at play. This fracture is not merely symbolic, it is a structural signal. It reveals that the administration does not operate as a unified whole, that internal conflict exists at the highest levels, and that policy is contested in real time. Musk's dissent is not just a critique, it is a recalibration of internal power dynamics, signaling to every other actor, bureaucrat, legislator, business leader, international partner that the narrative of cohesion is no longer reliable. Canada, for its part, will act with calculated patience. Publicly restrained, privately adaptive, Carney and his advisors will integrate Musk's statements into their strategy. They now have evidence that U.S. policy is not entirely consistent, that pressure may yield unintended results, and that the American negotiating position is not immovable. That alters how Canadian trade teams, European allies, and global markets approach diplomacy with Washington. The perception of division becomes leverage, subtly reshaping outcomes without a single confrontation. American markets are likewise attuned. Investors watch for supply chain disruptions, agricultural futures, and automotive production delays. Each percentage point of tariff translates into cost, uncertainty, and risk. Musk's public voice introduces the first visible variable into an equation that had, until now, been treated as binary, compliance, or resistance. The very act of questioning a cornerstone economic policy recalibrates market expectations, investor confidence, and corporate strategy. This is the lesson. Moments of public dissent at the highest level create a cascade. They reshape internal negotiations, signal vulnerability, and produce openings for recalibration that were previously unthinkable. They change the geometry of decision-making. What was once seen as unified authority now requires constant negotiation, internal consensus, and careful navigation of competing visions. Every policy, every announcement, every interaction is now refracted through the knowledge that the alliance has limits, that loyalty is conditional, and that influence is contested. And history moves quickly. These fractures rarely appear overnight. They creep in, invisible to most observers, until a single act, a statement, a post, a public break, illuminates the fault line. Musk's posts are that illumination, the silence that follows, the calculus inside the White House, the subtle adjustments in markets and trade negotiations that is the unfolding. That is where history is being written in real time. None of the underlying conditions have changed. Tariffs remain, retaliatory measures continue, supply chains are disrupted, and uncertainty persists for workers, businesses, and communities dependent on the integration of North American commerce. What changed is the political architecture. The wall of silent unity cracked. Once a wall cracks, it tends to propagate. The fissure will widen, shift, and influence future actions. Pay attention now. Watch the responses, or the lack thereof. Watch the follow-up posts, statements, and meetings that remain private but whose outcomes will ripple into public perception. Watch Canadian communications for subtle acknowledgements. Watch markets in Michigan, Texas, Ontario, watch agricultural and automotive data. The story is now in the details, in the shadows, in the quiet signals that tell you how influence is being negotiated. This moment is far larger than Musk and Trump. It is about the structure of American power, the management of policy at the highest levels, and the tension between instinct-driven leadership and operational reality. The stakes are not abstract. They touch every cross-border shipment, every factory, every worker, every market expectation. They touch the credibility of the administration itself. History rarely pauses. It unfolds layer by layer, action by action. Most people only recognize it after the fact, when the moment has already passed. You are witnessing it. You are seeing the first visible crack in an alliance that was long presumed unbreakable. And the implications will unfold in ways that extend far beyond Canada, far beyond tariffs, far beyond Musk or Trump. This is about the direction of American governance, the stability of its economy, and the future of its alliances. The story is not over, it is only beginning. The question for every observer, every decision maker, every citizen is whether this moment will be managed, recalibrated, and contained, or whether it will be the first chapter in a larger unraveling. And the most important question of all, if the man who helped build this administration is already publicly questioning its signature economic policy, what else is under strain, and how soon will the rest of it emerge? That is the question that will define the coming months. That is the story you must follow, not in headlines, but in the quiet, decisive, structural shifts that determine the course of power.